February 1959. The Ural Mountains, Soviet Union. 9 experienced hikers set off into a snowstorm and were never seen alive again. When rescuers finally found them weeks later, nothing made sense. The tent had been cut open from the inside. Their boots were left behind. Some bodies were found miles away in temperatures of -30 degrees, with no coats, no shoes, dressed like they had just woken up from bed. One woman was missing her tongue. Another hiker had a fractured skull, but no external wound on his skin. And the Soviet government classified the entire investigation for 30 years. 65 years later, nobody has a definitive answer. This is the Dyatlov Pass incident. Before we get into what happened, I need you to understand who these people were. Because this isn't a story about reckless kids. This is a story about some of the most prepared hikers in the Soviet Union. Igor Dyatlov, the man this incident is named after, was 23 years old, engineering student. He had already led multiple expeditions through some of the harshest terrain in Russia. The rest of the group, same level, seasoned, experienced. They had done this before. Their goal was a Category 3 hike, the hardest classification at the time, through the northern Urals in the middle of winter. Dangerous, yes, but for them, doable. They had supplies, they had equipment, they had a plan. And then something happened on the night of February 1st that made 9 of the most prepared people on that mountain abandon everything and run barefoot into a blizzard. Whatever it was, it scared them more than the cold. The group left the city of Sverdlovsk, now Yekaterinburg, on January the 23rd. 10 hikers, including one who turned back early due to illness. The remaining 9 pushed forward. On February 1st, they made camp on the slope of a mountain the local Mansi people called Kolatsiakal. In the Mansi language, that translates to Dead Mountain. They knew this. They camped there anyway. That night, something went wrong. When rescuers arrived weeks later, after the group missed their scheduled return, here is what they found. The tent was still standing, but it had been sliced open from the inside. Not unzipped. Cut. Like someone needed to get out immediately and couldn't wait for the zipper. Inside, all their gear was still there. Food, shoes, warm clothing, backpacks. They left in a hurry, and they left voluntarily. Footprints in the snow showed that all 9 walked, not ran, walked, away from the tent toward a nearby tree line, about 1.5 miles downhill. Some footprints showed people walking without shoes, in the snow, at -30. The first 2 bodies were found near a cedar tree at the forest edge, Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko. No coats, no shoes. Their hands were burned, like they had tried to climb the tree or start a fire. Branches above the tree had been broken, suggesting someone had climbed it. To look for something? To signal? We don't know. Further up the slope, they found Igor Dyatlov himself, face up in the snow, frozen. His hand was raised slightly, like he was still trying to crawl back toward camp. Zinaida Kolmogorova and Rustam Slobodin were found between Dyatlov and the cedar tree, spread out along the trail, as if they had collapsed one by one while trying to return to the tent. Slobodin had a small fracture in his skull, but his skin showed no external wound. Investigators couldn't explain it. 4 more bodies weren't found until May, buried under 4 meters of snow in a ravine nearby. And these 4? These are the ones that changed everything. Nikolai Thibault Brignolel had massive skull fractures. Alexander Zolotaryov and Lyudmila Dubinina had broken ribs. the kind of force that, according to the medical examiner, would be comparable to a car crash. And Dubinina, she was missing her tongue, eyes, and part of her lips. The Soviet medical examiner's conclusion? They died from an unknown compelling force. That was the official report. An unknown compelling force. Now, here's where it gets complicated. Because in the decades since, about a dozen serious theories have been proposed. And honestly, each one explains some things, but none explains everything. The first theory, and probably the most famous, is avalanche. The idea is simple. An avalanche hit the tent. The group panicked, cut their way out, and ran. Some investigators revisited this theory as recently as 2019, running computer simulations to model how a specific type of delayed slab avalanche could have caused injuries consistent with what was found on the bodies, crushing force without surface wounds. It's plausible. But here's the problem. There was no avalanche debris. The tent was still standing. And experienced hikers who survived an avalanche would most likely go back for their gear, not walk 1.5 miles into the woods and die in different places. The second major theory is infrasound. Certain wind conditions in mountain passes can create low-frequency sound waves, infrasound, that humans can't hear but can feel. Some researchers have suggested this could cause intense psychological distress, panic, even hallucinations. It could explain why the group fled in terror with no visible threat. Interesting? Yes. Proven in this case? Not really. There's no physical evidence of infrasound that night, and it still doesn't explain the broken bones. Then there's the military angle. Some investigators have pointed to the fact that high levels of radiation were found on some of the clothing, particularly Zolotaryov's. The Soviet military was conducting tests in the region at the time. There are reports of orange spheres being seen in the sky over the area in those weeks. Locals reported them. Meteorology students camping nearby reported them. Even Dyatlov's own group mentioned something glowing in the sky in their journal entries from earlier in the trip. Could the group have witnessed something they weren't supposed to? Could a military experiment, a secret weapons test, a controlled blast, have been the cause of those internal injuries? The government sealed the files for decades. That alone raises eyebrows. And then there's the theory that's the hardest to dismiss and the hardest to prove: hypothermia-induced paradoxical undressing. When people die of extreme hypothermia, there's a well-documented phenomenon where the body's thermoregulation fails, and the person suddenly feels intensely hot. They start removing clothing. It's irrational, but it's real. Some researchers argue this explains why the hikers were underdressed, but it doesn't explain why they left the tent in the first place. In 2019, Russia officially closed the case again, this time declaring the most likely cause was a snow avalanche. But investigators and researchers immediately pushed back. Families of the victims pushed back. The details still don't add up, and the missing tongue. Nobody has fully explained the missing tongue. Some forensic experts say soft tissue decomposition, especially in water, can cause extreme degradation that looks like mutilation. The 4 bodies in the ravine were partially submerged in meltwater for months. That could explain it. But it's one of those answers that feels almost too convenient for how unsettling the image is. Here's the thing that gets me every time I come back to this case. These weren't unprepared people. They weren't tourists who underestimated the cold. Igor Dyatlov's group had everything they needed to survive that night. They had done harder things before. And whatever happened, it was sudden enough that they didn't have time to grab boots. It was terrifying enough that experienced mountaineers didn't fight the cold. They ran from something worse. The Soviet government's secrecy didn't help. When you classify an investigation in a country where information is already tightly controlled, you create a vacuum, and vacuums fill with speculation, with conspiracy, with fear. The Mansi people, indigenous to that region, had long considered Kolatsiakal a sacred and dangerous place. Not because of superstition, but because of experience. Because mountain passes do strange things to weather, to sound, to light, to people. Whether it was natural, military, or something else entirely, 9 real people died on that mountain. And they deserve more than an answer that says unknown compelling force and closes the folder. I think what makes Dyatlov so enduring, beyond the horror of the details, is that it forces a question most of us don't like to sit with. Are there things in this world that we simply don't have a framework to understand? Most mysteries get solved. Crime scenes give up their secrets eventually. Science catches up. Witnesses come forward. But 65 years later, the Dyatlov Pass incident is still open, still debated, still keeping people like me, and probably you, up at night. If you've been following this case, you probably have a theory. Maybe it's the avalanche. Maybe it's the military. Maybe it's something nobody's thought of yet. Drop it in the comments. I genuinely read them, and some of the best leads on cases like this come from people who noticed a detail that everyone else glossed over. If this is the kind of content you're into, unsolved cases, historical mysteries, the moments where reality gets a little too strange, subscribe. I put these together because these stories deserve to be told properly. Not sensationalized, just honest. See you in the next one.